welcome everybody to PIS's Fundamental Fridays. This is a live series created by the Percussive Art Society, and thank you guys for joining us this afternoon. Today you are in for a treat. We have Master Sergeant Jeff Prosperie with us. My name is Julie Davila. I'm coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee, and I serve as your second vice president for the Percussive Art Society. If you have any questions at all during this live video, make sure to put those comments in the comment section. And at the end of Jeff's session, I'll try to get as many comments as I can to that. After we're done here today, this video is saved on the PIS Facebook page as well as the PIS YouTube channel. You can also find all of the Fundamental Fridays and the PIS Presents archived on our PIS.org website. So please take a look at all those resources. We've had some phenomenal sessions over the last couple months. So, all right, so we have Jeff Prosperie with us today. I'm going to give you a little history on Jeff. Jeff joined the Hellcats in 2006, almost 15 years, Jeff. Jeff has served as a section leader and principal drummer for Hellcats. Prior to his appointment at West Point, Jeff served as the director of Percussion Studies at the University of Louisiana-Lafayette. Jeff is the only individual to achieve what we call the Triple Crown in solo snare drum competitions, winning titles in DCI, PIS, and DCA. Involved in drum corps for many decades, Jeff marched Regiment, Star of Indiana, Phantom Regiment, Top Phantom Regiment, and he is a long-standing, incredibly admired adjudicator for DCI and WGI, and in 2018 inducted into the World Drum Corps Hall of Fame as well. So please welcome, it doesn't get much better than this, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for our Fundamental Fridays, Mr. Jeff Prosperie.
Wow, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. This is story time with Uncle Jeff. I've got some fascinating stories. I'm sure a lot of you haven't heard these before because I never knew half of this stuff until I started doing research, and some fascinating stories started to unravel. If you're like me, I was a kid growing up in Louisiana down in the swamps, and I learned these pieces, 3 Camps, Downfall of Paris, and I just learned it because my teacher told me to learn them, and he showed me how they went. And then I played them, and they didn't really mean a whole lot. But now that I know the rich history and the stories behind them, every time I played them, I really get a lot more joy and meaning out of the performance. And I want to share that with you. So we're going to start out with 3 Camps. A lot of people know 3 Camps. They think of it, oh, it's just a continuous roll. The sheet of music that I put up for the PDF you can find on the internet, but I could have chosen 7 or 8 different pieces, different arrangements that highlight different time periods in our history. So this is the one that we kind of tend to do in the United States. It's purely an American interpretation. It doesn't really exist in any of the history books. So let's go back a little bit in history and talk about how we got to the 3 Camps and what is it. It's really the old British Reveille. The Reveille is when we raise the flag. And ironically, here at West Point, which is the United States Military Academy, part of the Army, we're in New York, we train future leaders to lead our military. And each and every morning, we still play the same routine that they played back in the Civil War and even part of the American Revolution, which we inherited partially from the British. So each morning, we have what's called the Assembly of the Corps at sunrise, and it begins with 3 Camps. 3 Camps is the British Reveille. So the colonists in America took that from the British. If you go further back than that, the British took military drumming from the Swiss and the French who took it. If you can go back to the medieval time period with the Janissary Turkish bands where they used all kind of sound noise-making devices to instill their troops and to put fear in the enemy, military drumming has always been present, and it's still present here at West Point to this day. The group that I'm in, the Hellcats, we're the only remaining field music group in the Army. So that term field music group describes the musicians who regulate the duty day. So we have camp duty. And every morning we wake up and we go out and we play 3 Camps along with several other pieces, the Austrian, the Hessian, the Dutch, the quick Scotch, the slow Scotch, much like our rudimental forefathers did. So we carried that rudimental torch. And the cadets hear that each morning, and it's kind of like an alarm clock. When they hear the first thing and the cannon goes off and the flag raises and we begin to play all these tunes, they know exactly what tune they're on. It's like hitting a snooze button. Oh, I got about 3 more minutes before I need to get down there to form up for formation. So I'm going to play for you exactly how we play it here at West Point every morning. And then I'm going to backtrack to how we got to this arrangement, this style, this tripletized 12/8 kind of a feel, which was not the way 3 camps started back in the American Revolution. So here's how we do it at West Point. This is the 3 camps. You'll hear a roll at the beginning, 3 of them. That's called the 3 cheers or the 3 rolls. And that's more of like a roll off for the piccolo player to manually bring their instrument up. And then at the end, you hear a roll, and you'll see those in books. And that roll is more of a segue so the musician can go into the next tune. So when I was growing up, I always saw that roll at the end of 3 camps. I never knew what it meant. But now I know what it means because I play it just about every day. Okay, so that next tune was the Austrian. Then we play another segue roll into the Hessian, into the Dutch, the quick Scotch, all that. So actually that was the slow Scotch that I played. And then we would go into the Austrian. So it's a whole medley of tunes that the Americans started doing even far back as Charles Ashworth's Rudimental drum book in 1812. Ashworth was the first person to coin the phrase rudiment. Before that, they were just all called lessons. So in 1812, he had that term rudiment, and we never saw that term again until about 1862, 69, that name resurfaced. So let's backtrack a little bit because the British Reveille was not performed how I performed it just then. It was much slower, and it wasn't a continuous roll. It was more like this idea that I'm about to play. But what I really wanted you to do was to hear the melody of the piccolo player, the fife player, coming through the speaker. So you can relate the drum part to the melody. Okay, so here's how it would have been in the colonial time period. And really, all the way up until about 1946, it was similar to this. So you could march to it. 75 beats to about 108 beats, anywhere in that slower time. The quick time is faster, 108 and higher, but it was performed much slower. And the question was always in the different books that you look at, either the Ashworth book, the Samuel Potter book from 1812, both of those, or the Bruce and Emmett and the Colonel Hart book from 1862, or the definitive book, 1869, the Struve book, which is the fife and the drum and fife instructor. That was the definitive book signed legally to be the military drumming training book. So when we got to that point, things started to stabilize. But before that, the question of what do you do with the longer roll? So the 3 camps has a lot of different names. It's called the 3 camps. It's called the mother and the 3 camps. It's called the points of war. It's called Run Boy Run, which is a British drum beat. It's even called, where I grew up, when I used to teach my students, I called it hot gumbo. Hot gumbo, hot gumbo. Come and get your hot gumbo. And it's hot gumbo, and it's hot. It's hot. So you can see where I'm going with that. But it has a lot of different names. So let's talk about the mother and the 3 camps. The mother in all the old rudimental drum books was the 5-stroke roll, the mother of all rolls. It was used quite a bit. So that's the mother. and then the three camps. Where did that name three camps come from? Well, sadly, in our drum history, we had a prominent drum clinician in the 70s and 80s that would go around giving a clinic and tell this marvelous story about how there was three camps positioned in three different areas, and they would secretly, one drummer would play one beat and the other one would answer, and then the other one would answer, and then they'd all come together. That's a great story, but that is not accurate at all. And I believed it and retold that story many times. But if you look in any military manual, they would have never divided up the group, the units into three different camps. That would not have been a smart strategic thing to do. Now, the only way you can come up with three camps is, some people will say, is the three areas of the military, which is the infantry, the artillery, and the cavalry. So you got the horseback, you got the guns, and you got the foot soldiers. So those are your three camps. You got the mother, which is the 5-stroke roll. Then you got the points of war, which is also the first camp, which is a ceremonial beat that was played, like if a governor of state came, the president came, or the colors were brought back to the commander's quarters, the colors of the flags, the regimental crest. So all those names come together to describe the three camps. Now, how do we get to where we're just playing a continuous roll and almost triple ties or in 12/8? Well, what happened was, like I said, it was always slower. That's a quintuplet based roll, a 5-let, a 10-stroke roll, or an 11 with the release. That's on the downbeat. Some of the books had it starting on the right before the downbeat, so it sounded like this: 1 and 2 and a 1 again, a 2 again, a 1 and 2 and a 1 again, a 2 again, a 1. That kept your hands in the duple check pattern. But if you go to the putting the roll on the downbeat, that puts it into a quintuplet pattern. So that's something interesting too. And even in the Ashworth book, that long note was just 6 notes, a 7-stroke roll. If you probably even play slower than that. So how do we get to and even faster? Well, here's what happened. Around 1946, the Ludwig Drum Company came out with the book of solos, and they had the copy in there, and it was written to be played as a continuous roll, and it was like 120. And then we also had the Frank Arsenault album, which came out in 1955. And if you ever listen to that, he's an incredible drummer. Frank Arsenault, legendary, iconic, rudimental figure. But he burned that thing, man. He was flying. I clocked it last night at 155, 156. So where I just played it on my speaker with the Hellcat piccolo player, we tend to play it around 146. So 142, 146. So my point is, you can play the three camps like this. 75 beats a minute, or you can play it 155. It's all right, it's all wrong, depending on who you speak of. But we have come to a point in our American history that we play it basically as a continuous roll with accents, 120-ish to 144-ish, around that period. So that's a little bit about the three camps. One interesting thing is the very ending. That ending never existed in any of the early drum books. It just ended like this. Boom, nothing special. And then Strube came along in 1869. Remember, his book was the definitive book. And after that, there was no more books. Well, he threw in the and that's how we got that ending. So that's a little bit about three camps. The applications of how we use it in modern drum corps, we could grid it, or put flam drag, chief, flam 5. Me personally, I always like to use it as a speed chop building exercise. I'll go ahead and demonstrate that. I think I'll take a deep breath first so I don't pass out. So I would use that a lot to work on speed. So that's a little bit about the three camps. Sister Jules, I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments, but I think I'll move on off of the three camps. Any questions or comments about three camps?
It's very thorough. Hold on. Yeah, so far I think we're good, Jeff. Great stuff.
Okay, let me see how we're doing on time. Perfect, 1:20. I wanted to take 20 minutes now. Okay, let me make sure I didn't leave off anything that I wanted to say about three camps. So the biggest thing is the British may not be playing a continuous roll. They may be, but when you get together with someone and you want to play three camps, you really have to ask them, are you going to play a continuous roll, or are you going to play fives, the mother, and then the 11s? How fast do you want to play it? But for us at West Point, we're the only remaining field music group, so we're kind of the definitive right now in the military of how to play it, because we play it every day for the Corps cadets as we wake them up for the reveille, the raising of the flag, and the rising of the troops. All right, we're going to move on to Downfall of Paris. Now, I went through a lot of different books and did a lot of research. I want to give a little bit of credit right now while I stop. So I personally did a lot of research. I got a pile of books here, and I went through each one and compared and contrasted. But other people have done some great research too, and I just really want to give credit to Fred Johnson of Cadre on the three camps research that he's done. You can go on YouTube and put in Fred Johnson Cadre, which is the Canadian Association of Rudimental Drumming Excellence. So he did a presentation at USAR, the United States Association of Rudimental Drummers. That video is on the USAR website. It's also on YouTube. So I gleaned a lot of information from him, and also Dr. Eric Chandler's doctoral dissertation from LSU on the history of rudimental drumming. Of course, all the great books that I went through. Jim Clark wrote a great book, The Connecticut Drummers, Fife and Drummers. There's so much out there, and I'm glad to be able to share some of these stories and dispel some of the myths about the three camps that we've been carrying on. So it's very important we know where we came from, and we can apply it and create new ways to apply that to the drum set or whatever. So let's go on to the downfall of Paris. Interesting story about the downfall of Paris is I wanted to read this quote out of my Moeller book on page 89, the Moeller book from, I believe, 1956. Moeller, of course, went around the country and he went into retirement homes, and he interviewed a lot of Civil War drummers that were elderly, and he noted the Moeller style, which we're not going to get into, but that's who Moeller was. But the interesting thing in his book, I want to read this because this is really important, because it celebrates the spirit of drummers. When we get together, we like to drum things together because it's fun. We like to drum flamnambulas, flammables, you name it. We like to grid. We like to do cool stuff in the parking lot, whatever. So we like to pad it up and do things. Well, we're not any different than our forefathers. This is what Moeller says. The downfall of Paris is one of the most ancient and perhaps the most famous of beats. It has always been the pride of school drummers not only to play it so it sounded correct, but also to beat it in the prescribed way. The author finds in his 15,000-mile trip around the United States in 1925 that there are hundreds of drummers with this accomplishment. And when they meet, it is the beginning of a lifelong friendship. So that's the power of drumming together and the music, because it transcends generations. So let's go back to the beginning, the downfall of Paris. From the opera, The Picture of Paris, from 1790, which was premiered in London. So back in the day, when troops would march a long ways, it was very boring. And you're marching 20, 25 miles or whatever. And all of a sudden, when the fifes pick up their fifes and they lay out a tune that everybody knows and can whistle to and hum to, it really lifts the spirits of the troops. They're able to carry on, and it doesn't feel such a drudgery in the spirit. So that's one example of a popularly known melody. Both in the British knew it, the French knew it, and then of course our colonists knew it. And so you would hear that melody on road marches of the troops. So I'm going to go ahead and play it for you one time, and then I'm going to break it down because there's a lot of performance idiosyncrasies of this time period that you want to try to capture. So let me see if my speaker's still up. Yep, it didn't short out yet. So here's the downfall of Paris. The important thing to know is the drum part accompanies a melody. And if you're aware of that, it'll tell you the phrasing. You won't have to make a lot of choices. The phrasing is inherent in the melody. So this particular recording is just a friend of mine that I work with. She was in the hall and I asked her, hey, can we go into a room real quick and can you record Downfall of Paris? So she just mowed it down. She didn't do some of the classical weightings of the sevenths. I'll get into that in a moment. So this is pretty much straight ahead and on the fly. Here's the Downfall of Paris. So that's the Downfall of Paris. There's a melody. There's some idiosyncrasies that you have to know to play this. I will say, admittedly, when I learned it like in the 7th and 8th grade, I played it wrong on the 15-stroke rolls. I played 13s. I never took the time to count how many strokes I was doing. So I played and 2 and 1. And so I just played the 16th note bass. But there's a trick, and there's something you need to know about the 15-stroke rolls. But before I get into that, let me tell you a little bit about some different interpretations of the Downfall of Paris, because there's stories behind this too. So what we typically perform is what's called the Bruce and Emmett version. Bruce and Emmett, that's the book, Bruce and Emmett book, 1862. So actually in some of the older books in the Bruce and Emmett book, the flamacue had a double accent. Something to note. The flamacue is the only American, is pretty much the first American rudiment. So in all the old British books and the early colonial books, we never see that. We see it in 1862 with the Emmett book and the Colonel Hart book, which is also from 1862. So the Colonel Hart book had another version of the Downfall of Paris. And his version, instead of going flams on the downbeats, he had tap, tap, flam on the upbeat, flam tap, followed by a paradiddle. So it's tap, 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 and a paradiddle. So left-handed paradiddle coming off of a right-hand flam tap. So you can think of it as a flam tap going into a paradiddle, or you could almost think of it as a Swiss Army triplet going into a putter. But that's not how they were thinking about it, because putters weren't around and Swiss Army triplet wasn't around for us yet. But it's a flam tap going into a paradiddle. Some people put the accent there. So that's an interesting version that a lot of purists, especially on the East Coast, with the rich ancient fife and drum community out here, Some people prefer to play that, and they feel like that's really the way to go. But, you know, when publishing companies or drum companies get behind something and publish something, and it becomes the definitive, then we start to lose a little bit of history. So when the Ludwig Company came out with their book in 1946 of the 3 camps, and they made a note that says, play it as a continuous roll with accents in 3 camps, we lost a lot of that tradition that happened before that. When Strube came out with his book in 1869, and also Bruce and Emmett in 1862, we lost some tradition even there. There was a thing called a treble paradiddle or a triple paradiddle, and it had a totally different sticking in the Ashworth book. It sounded like this. So it was like a slurred 5, or everything's alternated except for the accents. You could think of it that way. 1 E and 2 E and double everything except for the accents. So that's your treble paradiddle. But when 1869 came along, Strube put his book out, he did this, which is what we have now. And of course, there's the rough and the drag controversy, which we could get into on another day. But there's research that's been done. So we lose things when we get publishing companies, different versions. So there's a propensity for drummers to always want to change stuff. We always want to add a cheese here, backstick something here, because we have cool imaginations and we want to have fun drumming. So a little bit about the downfall of Paris. You got the 7-stroke rolls. Now you have the weight. So use your arm. I don't care if you use a molar. That's molar, leading with the butt, or you can lead with the bead, or you can kind of lead with the butt and then go into the bead. We can get into all that too. That's all interpretations, right and wrong, depending on who you talk to and who you drum with. So there's weight to those accents. The reason why I say that, because my job at West Point is to march people. That's what I do for a living. I march people. And the way I do that is through weight of where the left foot's going to fall. Left, 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 right, left. If I'm not providing that, I'm not doing my job. Well, that gets a little boring. So someone invented the flamacue. We first see that in around 1862, Bruce and Emmett book. And there's a story behind who we think invented the flamacue and all that, the ragtime influence, the African-American influence. But that's a whole nother study. So we got the flamacue in here. That's pretty cool. And the other idiosyncrasy is the lifted, maybe slightly delayed 7. If you ever go to a muster or see a fife and drum corps marching down the street, and the energy it takes to wrap out a 7-stroke roll that fast, and they're marching several miles, you can see how they might get a little bit lazy and use that lift and not put the energy into it. And everyone kind of delays their footsteps. So that's an idiosyncrasy of the 7-stroke roll. It's a fast roll. Who wants to play super fast all the time? And that's the story behind the 15-stroke roll. So if you look at your music, excuse me, 4th line down, we see the 15-stroke rolls. They start on the left hand and on the right. So, like I said, I played them wrong for years. I went 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1. 16th note bass. That's only 13. 15s are faster. It's a lot faster. So why did they do 15s? Well, your choices are you could do 16th notes, which sounds slow. You can do sextuplets, which is really fast. Who wants to do that? Nobody wants to do that. So split the difference. The 15s fill it up nicely. Excuse me. How do you learn those? Well, it's 7 notes check pattern over the course of 1.5 beats. So one way you could think of it is, and 1 triplet 2 E and a 1. I will play that, and then you just round them out and spread them out over time. So here's quantized 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, don't do the speed up, slow down thing between the triplets to the 16th notes and just spread it all out. Really, if you just play a roll where it feels good, it's going to give it to you. That's the 15. All right, let's talk about lesson 25s. In the old book, the Ashworth book, the lesson 25 was called the preparative stroke. And why was it called the lesson 25? Well, remember, Ashworth coined the phrase rudiment in 1812, but no one really used that word. They were just called lessons. Well, Strube came along in 1869 with his definitive book. And his book is just laid out with lessons. Lesson 1, the mama, dad roll. He goes through all the different rudiments. And a lot of the rudiments had onomatopoeia names like paradiddle, paradiddle. The rudiment sounded like what you were going to play. Radamacue, that flam, rough. So when you get to the 25th lesson in the book just ends, and it's, there you go. So there's no fancy onomatopoeia, can't say that word, name. And it's just simply lesson 25 out of the Struve 1869 book. That's why it's called lesson 25. It's usually taught like this, but we often put the accent first. Now let's talk about interpretation of lesson 25. Let me see how we're doing on time. All right, so I'll wrap this up in about 4 minutes. The lesson 25, I personally play it about 3 or 4 different ways, depending on the musical setting. If I'm playing Connecticut halftime and I'm trying to march troops and I want to really lay into that downbeat, I'll tend to just accent the first note, play everything even, two-heightish, and quantize. That's not how I play them when I play Downfall of Paris. Because the Downfall of Paris, I'm trying to match the melody of the fife. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, sorry, sorry, da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. It has a lilt to it. And even within the microphrase of the lilt, dum, digga-dum, digga-dum, digga-da-ga-da, it has a forward direction. So forget about the rough and where you're going to put it. Just make sure you got that. So I'm playing, if you want to know the truth, I'm playing 4 different heights. I'm hitting an accent. I'm waiting a little bit and not quantizing it. I'm stylizing it. Depending on how long I wait, that's an interpretation. I'm using the rough as an embellishment to the primary note, not as a quantized rhythm. And I'm playing dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. So even those 3 notes, ta, 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 they have 3 different heights. So in Downfall of Paris, I typically would tend to have 4 heights with a musical microphrase and a long linear phrase. Robin Engelman, the late great Robin Engelman, did a tremendous amount of research on Downfall of Paris. So just Google that, find his webpage, and you can find a great deal about the Downfall of Paris. But please learn the Downfall of Paris, know something about it, pass that rudimental torch down to the next generation correctly, and realizing that there's a lot of interpretation involved. And that's what makes it fun, is the interpretation and the story behind it. Now we're going to move on to Crazy Army. There's a really cool story about Crazy Army. I learned this story from 2 people, Dominic Caccia and Jim Clark. I can't say enough about Jim Clark, how much I idolize that guy and the amount of knowledge he has, and Fred Johnson also. So go Google those names, they've contributed a lot. So the story goes, if you think about 1934, what was going on rudimentally, you had the creation of NARD, the National Association of Rudimental Drummers, 1933-ish. Drummers were starting to compete in drum and bugle corps. There was individual competitions. The East Coast was doing their rudiments, open, close, open. I think the West Coast was just open, close. There was a lot of fighting going on between the judges. Imagine that, judges, those darn judges. So they created the NARD, and then they created 13 essential rudiments, and things were starting to get standardized, competitions, all of that, the creation of drum and bugle corps through the VFW, the American Legion. A lot of national pride was going on, and eventually the younger children of the drum corps, the juniors, created junior drum corps, and they wanted to be more creative and do things they heard on the radio, Broadway pieces, jazz, show tunes, whatever, and they wanted to do cooler drill and not be bogged down with all the military inspections and all the rules and all of that. So that's how DCI was created. And now look what we have. We have WGI and we have DCI. We have historically Black colleges and universities. We have my good friends over at BIOS creating stuff that our rudimental forefathers, their brains would have blown up if they'd have seen that. So we've got Swiss, we got Scottish. The rudimental drumming can keep you busy for a lifetime, and it's really diverse and cool. And who would imagine our forefathers, if they could see what we're doing today, taking an instrument of war used to carry signals to the troops and regulate the duty day and turn it into a creative human expression of great shows that I've seen at WGI as a judge and DCI. So I'm just inspired by the next generation and what they're bringing to the table. And I want to do my part to hand off the rudimental torch so you know where you came from. So how did we get to Crazy Army? 1934. Crazy Army's famous because the Blue Devils used it for Legend of the One-Eyed Sailor back in the mid-70s, 75, 76, around there with Rick Adello. But the reason why they used it, the Blue Devils, is because Steve Gadd played it on drum set at the beginning of Legend of the One-Eyed Sailor. Why did Steve Gadd play that? Because he was taught by Bobby Thompson. Bobby Thompson taught my teacher, Marty Hurley, and Bobby Thompson also taught my other teacher, Dennis DeLucia. I marched in the Regiment and Phantom. You couldn't go further apart than that. So I went from this grip to right in the fingers with the Regiment. So Bobby Thompson teaching Steve Gadd. You can YouTube Steve Gadd and see him jamming his solo on the drum set to Crazy Army. And also the Santa Clara Vanguard with the electric wheelchair and using that. A couple of years ago, the Blue Devils did it on the field with one of their shows. I think they had like 1 million snare drummers. I was judging finals that night and they played Crazy Army, so that was cool. So Crazy Army, here's the story. Ready? 1934, Ed Limley is listening to what I believe was his crystal radio, and he picks up an Irish station, some jig, and you know, like all of us, when we hear something cool on the radio, like Bios does, we start improvising and doing all kind of stuff, high moms, whatever. Well, Ed Limley starts jamming out to this tune, and he creates this really cool beat. It's highly syncopated, got the flammacues around the beat over the bar line. But the only problem is it's late at night. It's like 2 in the morning. And he's afraid, like many of us, to go to sleep, go to bed, because he's going to forget this cool beat. So he wakes up his son, Kenny. Wake up, Kenny. Kenny is a drummer. He says, my son's a drummer too, so sometimes I teach him beats too, but I've never woken him up at 2 o'clock in the morning. But maybe I will. So he wakes up Kenny, and he says, I've got to teach you this beat. And he teaches Kenny the beat. Now, the cool thing about the story is Ed was a crafty person. He created these practice pads that were fastened to the edge of his bed. And he taught Kenny the beat at 2 o'clock in the morning on his bed while the wife is trying to sleep. So that's the story behind Crazy Army. He was kind of like the Stravinsky of his day with rudimental drumming, because people thought this was really crazy. Like, you can't be writing this syncopated stuff. And they wanted to kick him out of Nard. The legend goes, I think people were burning their houses and throwing their babies out the window. So it was that kind of a riot with the Crazy Army. So we at West Point play Crazy Army on a daily basis, but our duty tempo is 116. So we don't play 7s and we don't play 15-stroke rolls because we don't want to cram them that fast in. So our Crazy Army sounds like this. So that's not how the original Crazy Army went or how you would play it at a muster. A muster is a gathering of all these fife and drum corps. They happen a lot in Connecticut and New York. I've been to many of them. Deep River, Dram, Deep River Ancient Muster is a great one, Westbrook. And these fife and drum corps get together and they camp out and they drum till all hours of the night and they drum all day. You really can see the passing of the tradition from the older statesmen to the younger children. And my son actually grew up in the fife and drum corps. And we've had a lot of iconic drum corps people, even the newer generation with Patrick McHale and Phil Andrews and some of those guys, if you know those names, coming. And Mark Riley grew up in that tradition too. Mark Riley with the old guard, great drummer, man, incredible drummer. So that's a little bit about the muster scene. Let's talk about Crazy Army. So the interesting thing about Crazy Army, you got a lot of 7s. And I want to point out something that I didn't necessarily know as a kid, but in some of these ancient rudimental pieces, Connecticut Halftime, Crazy Army, Hell in the Wabash, you'll see these second fill. You have the fill. Well, the fill is just a way to fill in something the second time you go around it. Instead of playing what was written, you fill it in with something else. So maybe instead of playing a flamacue, you play a sextuplet. So you can see this on the Crazy Army. If you look down the lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5. So bar 19, I think, yeah. If you look at bar 19, and you look at the first bar of the whole piece, they're the exact same bar, but where there was a flammecue, there now is a sextuplet. So that's an idea of a fill. You see them a lot in Connecticut halftime. Lesson 25s, sextuplets, etc. Mark Riley did a great presentation on the Connecticut halftime on a Fundamental Friday several weeks ago. Go back and watch that. It was gold. So here's the Crazy Army with the 7-stroke rolls. I'm going to play it as syncopated and groovy as I can by ghosting certain notes and bringing out certain notes. I will say this, all of this stuff, you cannot just go by what you read on the paper. There's a lot of weights of notes that notation can't capture in that time period. The younger generation today is excellent at notating everything through tenuto markings, staccato, different weights, but you really have to drum with someone who is experienced and older, or watch a video like this to find the different weights, because I'll put some slight accents where there aren't any, and I'll ignore some. So for example, the 5th line down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5th line down after that sextuplet, you got that double right, ba-da-da-da-da-ba-ba plam. I don't really play an accent there, and most people that I play with don't play that. The old guard I know does some really cool syncopated accents, duga-baka, where we go duga-dat, duga-dat. If you want to see a cool video, go on YouTube, check out Hellcats, my group, and the old guard, Mark Riley's group, coming together at USARD several years back. We played Crazy Army. The remarkable thing about that video is we just got together and we just ran it down like one time. We didn't practice it. We just said, hey man, it'd be cool to play this. So we played it and we counted it off and we went and played the first 7-stroke roll. We're using our eyeballs to see where everything's going to be, how much lag time, how high you're using peripheral vision. You're feeling that first 7. The first 7 sounded like crap. The next one and all the other ones sounded great because the experience of the players and the intuition locked in, and we're like, oh, there it is today. That's where the 7 is. So go back and watch that video. I'm really I love watching that video. I love hearing kind of the dirt on the first 7 and then everybody making an adjustment. It's a really cool video, and we're playing Crazy Army. So here's Crazy Army. I'm going to play it through, and I think we're going to wind down and then ask questions. So you got Ed Limley, 1934, Steve Gadd, Blue Devils, Santa Clara Vanguard. Play it on your drum set. You can play it fast with 5s and 13s, or you can play it slow and swanky like I'm going to do with 7s and 15s. Here it is, with repeats. I put a few crescendos on the second endings on the flam taps too. It's just something I do. 1, 2, 3. Crazy Army, awesome, fun piece to play. Part of our heritage, 3 camps, downfall, Crazy Army. Learn it, know it, love it, pass it on. Any questions from the Sister Jules and the Peanut Gallery?
For sure. Great job, Jeff. Wow. What a history lesson. I love it. I can't get enough of hearing you tell some of the stories and sharing sort of our lineage. We do have a couple questions from some listeners and watchers out there. We have the first one is from Mike Leitsky from Nashville. Hey, Mike.
Right.
He says, it sounds like many innovations have taken place in the ancient rudimental drumming in the 1950s. And he asked, do you foresee another period of time or of that happening, or do you feel like the tradition is the utmost importance? Do you see innovations sort of skewing where we're headed, or should we stay rooted in tradition?
So I have a lot of thoughts on that. I'm going to try to concise it down. In the history of rudimental drumming, as I do my research in all these books, there was always this going on between the younger generation and the next. A great example is the 6/8 double drag, which shows up in the military call roast beef, which is a dinner call. Well, when that first came out and people were doing that, it was hard to find a beat, and I'm sure the drummers were like little boys and they weren't all that great. So there was a lot of like, hey, we don't want you to play that. Even some colonels were forbidding it. Don't play that beat. But the younger generation was like, no, this is cool, this is cool. So there's always been that element of the younger generation wanting to be creative and do cool things. So what we see in drum corps, particularly in WGI, is that tempos have gotten a lot faster. Drill writers have a lot of influence in the way and why we drum. So as evolution goes along, technique has to change. The instruments are changing, Kevlar head. We're no longer playing loud military calls to the troops. We're playing voicings and choirs of drum sounds, soprano, tenor, bass. And we're complementing music, and we're running around doing physical simultaneous responsibilities. So as the tempos get faster, we start to lose some vocabulary. Like it's hard to play Radamucus at 200.
Sure.
I can't do it. But it's easy to play Radamucus at 100, right? So what we're seeing now is that some of our rudiments can be played, your feet might be moving twice as fast, but you're playing slower. Or more importantly, this next generation of drummers are so educated from majoring in music and studying pieces like Elliott Carter's timpani and all these metric modulations, De La Cluse, Albright book, whatever. They have a thorough understanding of metric modulation, so they can justify and play whatever they want at any tempo, as long as there's a couple of strong beats here and there. But they can phrase over the bar line, metric modulate, and play whatever vocabulary and groupings they want through the math, which really is the same thing if you think about when you're in the colonial time period and you're trying to teach someone how to play a 15-stroke roll. You know, we're like, we just want to play this speed of a roll. Don't think about it, just play that. But it's really 7 beats, 8 notes over 1.5 time. So that's the metric modulation way back when, if you think about it. So my point is, with education and math and the tempos going so fast, we can start to play vocabulary that we never played again before, that we lost, like Radamucus and whatever, because we can do metric modulations or play them like twice as slow. So that's the next creative thing, and all the visual elements with bios and the body and all that. I'm trying to keep up. I spent a lot of time like learning, there's a guy breaking down the Blue Devil snare breaks from the last 2 years. I'm sitting at home and like the math behind all that. My son marched in Phantom Regiment. He brings home the music, and Rob Ferguson's writing all this crazy. I mean, I need a calculator to figure that stuff out. But my son's like, to him, it's second nature. So I feel like he's ahead of me in a little bit of that. So I'm trying to keep up. Old dog doing new tricks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we all want to stay moving forward, right? But I think it's great to still be rooted in the history and the traditions. And so, you know, we're really appreciative, like guys like you and Dominic Cucci that you mentioned, Mark Riley, Dennis DeLucia, Nick Anastasio, all those guys that have kind of helped. Even Robin Engelman, you know, Robin brought like the Heritage concert to PAS and started, you know, helping us through that. Ed Freitag had a question about Crazy Army. He said, at West Point, do the Hellcats interpret, when you guys play that together, do you interpret that the same as you just performed it, or are you a little bit more conservative about some of the phrasing and the interpretations? So
my job as a Hellcat, we march cadets. So we got a corps of cadets. There's 4,000 of them. We're trying to move them to lunch, to drill practice. We're trying to move them. So we have a duty tempo, a 116. And the clearer and more precise and steady and regular that we can play, the better they're going to look. So we play everything very straight, square, not any interpretation except for weights and phrasings. But metronomically, we're pretty quantized. We have a new principal drummer now named Dave Oriente. I've passed it down, and he's the next generation. He won the job a few years back, and he's got a lot of ideas about how to write quantized stuff but still make it sound ancient, kind of like what I was talking about with the metric modulations. So that's really cool. But at West Point, we have to play duty tempo, and when we're playing as a line, we're marching cadets. Now, part of our job is to create a little show where we're a showpiece for the academy. in the Army, and we might go out to a place and do a show like at USARD. Go on the USARD website. There's a video of us from 2011 where we did a whole show. We don't do a lot of shows. It's not really our primary mission. But when we do them, we will tap into some of the freer, floaty stuff. Now, the old guard's able to do a lot of that because they are a showpiece. They're not really a field music functioning group waking up troops and regulating the duty day. They're kind of like curators of the tradition. And they also have a lot of innovation with vocabulary, but they're able to make contemporary things sound ancient. So that's the challenge that they have to maintain their identity and get creative, but not too outside the box.
Sure. I mean, you guys are really responsible to facilitate sort of the day-to-day operations. Yeah,
we're servants. Like my job, I'm a servant. I'm just providing something for somebody. I'm playing a funeral for someone that gave their life for our country. I'm marching the future leaders. So I'm at a ceremony, like a couple of weeks, the President of the United States is coming. We're going to play for the President. So that's the kind of stuff we do.
That's awesome. Hey, so I remember in a presentation I saw just a few weeks ago, you talked a little bit about like the weight and the heavy left. I thought that was interesting. Can you speak a little bit? I mean, it's kind of the same, but speak a little bit about that heavy left. I think you even told a story about like when you get away from that, the troops don't march the same, and then you have to
so you're out there playing, and you might have an hour-and-a-half gig where you're marching people around. Dennis DeLucia was a Hellcat, by the way, and he used to tell me a story. That was during the Vietnam period where they kind of had to be there, or else they had to go to war. So he chose to come serve his country by drumming. But some of those guys didn't necessarily want to be there all the time. So he told me, for giggles, I won't say the S word, but for S and giggles, he would throw in a 3/8 bar every now and then to throw the cadets off, and they'd all have to skip, 1, 2, 3, But anyway, but we have to provide a heavy left. If I'm just going out there by myself and there's not a bass drummer going boom, 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 I would outline that. If I throw in something fancy like that, now the cool thing is I can make it all up. That's very creative. I go out there, I can play whatever I want, or I can just play stock beats. And sometimes we get a little crazy, and then the bass drummer kind of looks at you and goes, "What the hell are you doing? Come on, man." But if I got the bass drum there, I'm free to kind of play around. But if I don't have the bass drum, I got to lock it in. I love the 6/8 ones, the weight on that. I'll play Burns Moore's fancy 6/8. My favorite thing I do at my job. That was a fill where we're throwing Rudimentals. But my point is, I'm really trying to give some energy and velocity and height into the accents.
Awesome. Hey, so John Hearns was asking, you've referenced several like really great historic books through this session. And he mentioned like, where can someone pick those up? And if we want to add those to our library or to order those.
Okay, I'll quickly go through this real quick. The first one is the Ashworth book. I got it from George Carroll. George Carroll recently passed away, so I'm not sure. Now, what George Carroll did is he took the Ashworth book from 1812, which is the father of rudimental drumming. He uses that term, and it's all in this old notation, which is really hard to read. He wrote it in modern notation. Okay, the Eric Chandler dissertation from LSU. He has all those books in there too. That's the first one, and then you've got the Bruce and Emmett. So there's a company of fifers and drummers from Connecticut. They sell all this, I believe. So check them out on their website. But that's the Bruce and Emmett. Definitely want that. Got the Stroud book. So probably all of this can be bought at the company of fifers. Someone else might want to chime in. This is just a Moeller book. I'm not sure where you get that. This book I use has downfall and the modern notation that Pratt did of 3 camps, where he puts it in 4/4 with triplets. That's a great resource. I love this book. I've read it like twice already, and every time I read it, it's incredible. I can't say enough about this guy. He's my hero, Jim Clark, nicest guy you ever met. He does some clinics for USARD. We had him out to work with us at the Hellcats, but that's a great book. You want to buy that book. It's very storytelling. I would say it has affected the way I present clinics in that it's a storytelling format. Of course, Intermediate Snare Drum book has 3 camps in it. That's my go-to for those books.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we also had someone ask what kind of sticks you're using today.
Man, okay, I use a lot of different sticks. I love using different sticks all the time, depending on what I'm going to play. So if I'm going to play like a really burning fast individual solo on a Kevlar head, and I got to use that technique, I usually go with the Brett Kuhn velocities or momentum. I need a smaller stick that's going to fly. But when I want to sound full and meaty and historically accurate, I love the Jim Costello Innovative Percussion. They're very rudimental in nature. They just feel rudimental. So I use that. When we're on the parade field at West Point and we need to play loud for the cadets, I use the Paul Rennick, the heavier ones. I think they're number 2s. Yeah. Number 2s. When I don't need to be as heavy, I use the smaller ones. And then I always love the Field Series, the FS1s, I think they're called. Mm-hmm. So I use a lot of different sticks depending on what I'm playing. For today, and since I'm not playing that fast and I'm playing full, I like these Jim Costellos.
Awesome, thank you. Hey Jeff, I know you've had some pretty amazing teachers over the years. Got Marty Hurley that you've referenced, Dennis DeLucia, Pat Petrillo, John Wooten, Doc Shatroma. Just maybe give us a few takeaways. Some of those are descendants of each other, right? Wooten's a descendant, right. Marty. Maybe just give us one or two takeaways that you might credit your teachers with, or sort of life lessons. And
right. So, growing up, I say in the 70s and 80s, we had the Betamax machine. not even the VHS yet, the VCR. But I remember watching drum corps on a VHS, on a Beta machine. Then my drum teacher, John Michelli, he might be watching. He's just a guy that was in Thibodaux teaching my high school. Great fundamental teacher. He's not like a percussion major music person. He's a realtor, I believe, or a banker. And anyway, he studied from Marty Hurley. So he gave me such a good, strong foundation that I'm so thankful for. But that foundation came from Marty Hurley, which came from Bobby Thompson. And then through Dennis DeLucia was also taught by Bobby Thompson. So that little family tree happened. And then I marched in the Bridgman. I grew up in high school playing like this. And then I went to the Bridgman and played like this. I went to Star of Indiana, played like this. Then I went back to Phantom and marched 2 years back like that. And I went to North Texas and learned a lot of Blue Devil and Cavalier. So just be a student and realize every technique has its advantages and disadvantages. I still use this technique with the pinky cocked back when I need to play loud on the field. When I need to ramp up, but if I'm playing fast finger stuff, I'll go to a different technique. And then just being a life student. I mean, go to many clinics and see what you like, see what you don't like.
Totally, yeah, I totally believe in being a life student. I mean, you can take away.
One thing too, I'm worried about this in our tradition and passing the torch. We do a lot of this virtual stuff, and it's really cool. But there is nothing like going to a live clinic and watching a person play live and getting the essence, the energy, the feeling, the firsthand experience of seeing someone play live. Those indelible images, you can always remember those. I remember Marty Hurley playing on my drum. I remember John Wooten playing on my drum. Pat Petrillo. You can't get away from that.
Absolutely. And you can always take away something from somebody, right? I remember being at a Wooten camp one time teaching with Marty Hurley, and I'm teaching with him, but I'm taking notes on the side, or had an opportunity to teach with Hannum at several camps, and same thing. You're just learning different ways to say things, and it's amazing. Thanks. Hey, so Jeff, another question I have is, as teachers, we're always, particularly at the collegiate level, students are coming to us saying, I want to make a living doing this. And maybe you can speak a little bit to that, how you might encourage this next generation. I'm sure when you were the 18 to 22-year-old Jeff Prosperie, might not have known where you're going to end up at West Point with the Hellcats. I know you had several different paths you were interested in taking, but I don't know if you can give us a couple encouraging words to students out there, or to teachers, and how they can share with their students. We have a myriad of opportunities in our field, and I feel like there's room for everybody, but I don't know if you want to speak to that just a little bit about your path and just being able to encourage others.
Yeah, so I majored in music ed, but I didn't really have the intention of wanting to be a band director, but that seemed like the best way to go. I kind of wanted to be a drum corps person and teach a drum corps. And then I did that for a while. And then I realized I wanted a little more stable future, and I wanted to have a wife and kids. And I have 5 children, and you start weighing things that you never thought about when you're 18. Who's thinking about 18? Like, so the drum corps thing is a difficult road. It's easier now because the staffs are bigger and people come in and out of tour all the time. But when I was teaching, man, you showed up on the first day and you left finals night. You didn't leave. At least in the regiment when I taught, we didn't leave. So as I started studying classical music, mainly because of the Phantom Regiment, I started really enjoying it, and I found out that I was pretty good at orchestral percussion because of the discipline, the precision, the ensemble skills, all the things I learned in drum corps easily transferred to orchestral percussion. So I really went down that road. I won the PAS orchestral competition, won the PAS mock audition, did a lot of auditions, served as the principal drummer in the Baton Rouge Symphony. So I was doing that, but I needed like a plan B because winning the full-time gig is really, really hard. So I started teaching at a really good high school in Texas. And then my high school program got so good that I was starting to get phone calls for college gigs, which I had never thought of. Like, wow, I could be a college professor? I guess I could. My program's pretty good. So then I started getting calls for college gigs, and then I found a perfect fit for me, the University of Louisiana-Lafayette, because I'm from Louisiana. And so I taught there for like 7 years, and then I really just wanted to play more. And the demands of a college program of trying to run the Japanese taiko ensemble, the steel band, the African drum and dance, the Brazilian, the classical ensemble, the pop ensemble, the drumline, and still playing gigs with the Baton Rouge Symphony every night. I wasn't home very much. And for me, a priority was to be home and be a good husband and good father. So I started looking into other areas, and then I've heard about the West Point job, and a friend of mine said, man, this would be a good job for you. It'd be a really good fit. And I hadn't thought about it. Like, wow, that's what I played when I was in 7th grade, snare drum. Like, I'm way beyond that. I've been doing marimba and orchestral, but I went ahead and did it. Now at West Point with the audition, we have to play everything, all the percussion instruments, because we have a concert band and we have to sub or play extra percussion on a moment's notice with the band. So that whole orchestral background served me well in the audition. And because I had done so many auditions, I was real comfortable by the time I won this audition. So my advice to you is learn as many skill sets as you possibly can. You don't know where you're going to go and why you're going to go there, but trust your teacher. Your teacher is telling you to learn these things. And when I was in school, I was like, man, I don't want to learn that. I don't ever want to do that. All this theory stuff and 4-part harmony. I'm never going to teach a choir and blah, blah, blah. And don't be like that. Learn what your teachers say to learn. Drink the Kool-Aid, and then you have more skill sets. Nowadays with electronics and composition and full-time high school percussion, middle school instructors, man, you can almost do a lot of different things. And with the internet, being an entrepreneur and all that, I'm retiring in 6 years, and I've got a bunch of ideas that I want to do. So I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely we're in a generation of entrepreneurship and multiple revenue streams. So it's definitely possible. Thanks for sharing that, Jeff. Hey, before we close, I know you mentioned Dennis was a Hellcat. There's quite the legacy of drummers that have come through the Hellcats. Can you speak to a few of those, share a few of those, John Pratt?
Sure. So in the PAS Hall of Fame, in the marching percussion genre, I think we have Fred Sanford, Dennis DeLucia, Pratt, and Ralph Hardiman. Am I missing anyone? I think that's it. Yeah. So out of that group that I just mentioned, 2 of them were Hellcats. Dennis DeLucia was a Hellcat, and so was Pratt. So Pratt was a remarkable individual. He just passed away a few months ago. Myself and the other Hellcats, we did a whole presentation on Pratt, a clinic at USARD about 2 years ago, in 2018. Go to the USARD website under convention videos and watch that whole clinic on Pratt. I outlined the man, who he was as a drummer, as an English teacher, as a poet, as a dear friend of Robin Engelman, all of his contributions. That is really, I was really happy about that clinic, and we captured who Pratt was. And Dennis DeLucia is Dennis DeLucia. Everybody knows him. He's done so many great things, and for the many great things he's done, he's even a greater person. So,
absolutely.
So yeah, I'm proud to be part of that lineage, serving as the section leader and as the principal drummer, and now passing that down to Staff Sergeant Dave Oriente, who won individuals in 2009 with the Blue Stars, and he recently won an audition a couple of years ago, and he's on fire. He's got a ton of ideas, and we're kind of some older guys in the section, so we need a little fire under us to get us moving again. And so he's got a lot of ideas about stuff he wants to do, and it's been fun just showing up at rehearsal and being a line player again and having someone tell me what to do instead of just creating the vision and all that. So the next generation is exciting, but be educated. Be educated and have experiences. That's what we're looking for.
Awesome. Well, that's a good segue to our last question we've got from Neil Landini. How do you see percussion education changing as there are so many more opportunities out there for percussionists? I know you've sort of captured that a little bit in your previous statement, but if anything else you'd like to elaborate about?
I would like to elaborate. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, there was drum corps. And there was percussion, musicians. They weren't the same thing. There was this going on. You're a dumb drummer or a drum corps person, and then you are a musician and an orchestral percussionist or a total percussionist. The marketing campaigns in all the books were like, be a total percussionist. Don't be just a drummer. So there was a negative connotation. And I can remember even when I was in college, my college professor didn't quite understand why I was doing this stupid thing called drum corps. Like, you're already a pretty good snare drummer. You don't need to get better at snare drum. You're never going to get a job playing snare drum. I do have a job playing snare drum. But anyway, my point is there was this rub going on, but we've come over that hump, because now in drum corps, you have educated people that have gone to school and got masters and doctorates. You got the Paul Rennicks of the world, the Tom Hannums, the Tom Monks. I'm not trying to leave anybody out, but most of the people out there teaching drum corps are highly educated. Jim Campbell. So they're not just drummers from drum corps. They're educated percussionists that have found the value and created a market for people to make a living doing drum corps. So have all those skills and don't put your nose up to drum corps, because it really is evolving into a transfer value activity where even the keyboard players now, because of amplification, can play with regular technique instead of playing with rocks and pounding the crap out of the instrument. So there's a lot of nuance and phrasing and shape and musicality, ensemble skills, timing, interpretation, teamwork, camaraderie, all goal setting, excellence, hard work, all that stuff you're learning applies to drum corps and transfers to any other genre.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up today. Jeff, we really want to thank you for sharing all your knowledge, historical. It's great playing today, of course, as always. There's several YouTube videos that you can access to see the Hellcats. Jeff's done several. I encourage you guys to check that out. And he mentioned a few in this video. We want to thank the Percussive Art Society once again for this Fundamental Friday. If you're looking for more resources, and I know there's a lot of online resources right now, but Percussive Art Society has got some great sessions going on. It's a go-to. So check out Percussive Art Society on Facebook, on their YouTube page. You can also go to pas.org. And all the Fundamental Fridays and all the PAS presents are archived there as well. So hope you guys are enjoying these sessions and continue to look for more. Let's give Jeff a thank you for sharing with us today. And we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jeff.